Because I don't know if you guys have ever met that many Nigerians, but they're harder workers than you. Just period. I'm sorry.
International VCs were afraid of investing in Africa, et cetera. Et cetera. So is that something that you've seen? And if so, how would you go about building up that kind of onward funding path for the startups that are actually quite good already?
Awesome question. And totally true. The fact remains that it's kind of like when you're teaching a child to, let's say, do any kind of remedial task. You kind of work them up to it. You say, oh, we're going to give you a small test, right? And that's what a lot of like this angel funding kind of looks like. It's like, oh, that is a really cool idea. Oh, that African community there has really got some smart whippersnappers going on. We're going to give them like this initial seed funding, and then but we're really going to put all our money towards these established European-based or United States-based companies that just happen to be doing digital services in Africa, not actually innovating solutions within the continent. From where we're standing at Abyssinia, we figure platforms like Gitcoin, really cool, pretty open idea there, just like this is what we're trying to build. Let's try and raise grants. Let's try and get angel funding directly towards opening solutions or input to the greater open source community and then applying it how we see fit. Daniel, nice name tag.
Thanks. And I just wanted to thank you for a good presentation. It's always great to have perspective delivered to the West in a way that's meaningful. For what it's worth, the foreign direct investment world, where there's international development and then there's commercial development, those are two big silos, a lot of overlap in Africa. If you were going to redo your presentation, I would offer that might be a really neat thing to add. The international development thing is a big legacy, and it's not going to government.
Yeah, so there is a lot of data on that. Unfortunately, for this time period that I had, I wanted to focus mostly on kind of what we all see in the tech world, which is like business plans. And when you read that really good, like feel-good Forbes story as you scroll through Twitter that says that, oh, there was this much money put towards African startups, specifically in agriculture this year. Like, let's remember to put that all in perspective. And when we see those big financial plans put out and speculations on really bond markets and stuff like that, this is what we're talking about. I think that the NGOs and international money from all sorts of kind of industries or backings is great. But it all kind of still boils down to the same issue that happens across the business world, which is nobody seems to be trusting Africans to build their own solutions. And it doesn't matter where the money comes from. It's still coming with the predetermined interests of the West.
Great response. I'll just make a quick comment. Microsoft, with their For Africa program, it's a great example of what you just said. They're making a lot of investments to get eyeballs in front of their products. I totally get that. The question I had for you is infrastructure. Is it just a foregone conclusion that the mobile cellular industry is going to be the way that Africa does its internet infrastructure if it isn't in an urban core environment? And then the second question, if you want to take it, is for all the jobs and the money, that was all in urban core, right? It was all in big cities.
Yeah, for the most part.
Nothing in the sort of that second tier city. Yeah,
mostly only like NGOs kind of expanded into those communities. And Microsoft's a good example of they have, I think, set up an incubator for about 100 new developers to join their teams being fostered inside of, I believe it's Nigeria right now. And they have a great, awesome plan for 500 by, I think, 2025 or something like that. And that's really great outside investment and potential being fostered through corporations. The next part of your question was specifically towards kind of those outer territories. And I think when you... Well, and yeah, it is the place that needs it most, but if you look at the trends that were followed by generally almost all African countries, it's the same industrialization trends that happened in the West, in London in the 1800s and the United States with like the New Deal and things like that, is like you had rural communities leaving their traditional rural family lifestyles and moving to massively and rapidly growing cities. And that a lot of that opportunity and those like people are moving there because they want to do something new. They want access to this new world and these new tools. So while the NGOs and like people like the MIT Media Lab and Nicholas Negroponte go into those surrounding areas, all they're really doing is like bringing those people, making them aware of the tech innovation that could be happening around them. And what I think is it's actually going to be the responsibility of the indigenous people themselves to take it from those urban cores and expand it to the surrounding territories. And that's where it's actually going to happen.
Thanks. Really great talk and helpful perspectives. I got an OLPC back in the day, so I've been interested for a long time. Just quickly, you didn't mention China that I remember, and
Yeah.
what I hear, knowing very little about the space, is that China is moving in a massive way. So I wonder if you can contrast anything that they're doing or just speak to that.
I purposely kind of didn't talk about China, not because they're not doing the exact same thing, but because there tends to be a perspective that happens in the West where it's like, oh, look at what China's doing and look how they've gone into this African country. They've basically bartered having the port of Mombasa in Kenya for like a railroad system in the country. And look how they're taking advantage of these communities and giving them money, but with massive debt following it as well. And I kind of kept China out of it in this regard because that is true, all of that's happening, but it's too easy of an escape and a scapegoat for Western corporations and organizations and like developer groups to say, well, I mean, what we're doing isn't perfect, but look how China's taking advantage of the continent. Look how bad that is. And in reality, we're doing the exact same thing. It's just much more systematic than brute force, and you can't really give them a bunch of credit for being terrible people while not actually looking internally at the systems you partake in to keep these people under the status quo of global imperialism. So, yeah. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Great talk. In terms of building out a developer community, curious to hear your take. How important do you think like translating content is? Or is like English just becoming so prevalent and just like a requirement to become a successful developer or entrepreneur?
So that's a really good question. And kind of bringing it back to what I believe Daniel was saying, where it's like in the urban centers, especially, you're going to still find that a lot of people have a better education than people in the United States. The amount of second languages and third languages that exist across Europe is kind of nothing compared to a lot of the communities that are actually in Africa itself, wherein you have people who speak Kiswahili, Swahili, and Shang, like all as the very different variations of what Kiswahili actually is, or you have people in Nigeria speaking multiple tribal language as well as English. Because I don't know if you guys have ever met that many Nigerians, but they're harder workers than you. Just period. I'm sorry. They have, like, in their culture, it is built that you are going to be the best at this or you are not going to be a part of this family, which, for better or worse, I mean, they're great developers. So they know a lot of languages, and so English has been pretty easy to adopt. But once again, those people who speak English and then also those 4 other languages, the onus is on them to spread the information and spread, like, the tools and the access to it. The onus is on us to make access to developer tools easier and more applicable to the devices that they actually have in the population. And instead of punishing people for leapfrogging and expecting them to then go back in time or backwards and buy the hardware like a desktop or a laptop, and there's no real reason why that monetary investment is applicable across the whole population of the continent. It's not feasible by any means. So, yeah, language translation is super important, but I think it's once again an issue solved by the local population.